So today I have like Dennis Logan. He used to work at Exos, Cleveland Brown, and uh now he's like I think it's this July he's coming to Taiwan to do a XPS, and I'm gonna be translating for him. So what an honor. Am I missing something, Dennis? Can you like introduce yourself a little bit more?
Yeah. No, I think you got the vast majority of it. Dennis Logan. Former strength and conditioning specialist for athletes performance slash exos. Shortly after that, I went on to work for the Cleveland Browns. After that, I was the head of athletic performance for Munster Rugby in Ireland. And now I am um, working with Exos while also building my own online education platform. So, um, definitely a pleasure and honored to be on this podcast with you. And yeah, looking forward to it.
Nice, nice. So, um, like you mentioned, you're like you spend like I think, like a lot of time with Exos in your career.
Mm-hmm.
So, can
Yeah.
you talk a little bit about like um during your time at Exos, like how did you work with other coaches and how did the experience help you like grow as a coach?
Yeah. One of the things that I often say is that my time at Exos was easily the most influential part of my strength and conditioning career. I spent close to 9.5 years there. I started out as an intern. So I did their internship in the fall, so between September and December of 2007. Um, when I went in with the idea. I got into strength and conditioning because I wanted to be a head strength and conditioning coach for an NFL football team. I played football while I was growing up in high school. I loved football. And essentially, I knew I was never going to be big enough to play, but I figured I could still be a part of it. And if I went the coaching route, and a lot of what drew me to Exos was, especially at that time, there weren't many places that I knew of that were really looking at human performance from all of these different, all of the components, right? Bodybuilding at the time um, was almost like the prevailing or predominant method of um, trying to get athletes to be bigger, faster, stronger. But it wasn't until I discovered athletes performance, which was the name of the company at the time, that I discovered a place that was actually like looking at human movement, looking at nutrition, looking at mindset, looking at these things. And so I did my internship there. And what was great is, as an intern, you were paired with a coach that had a specialty. There were a number of coaches that had a number of different specialties. So even though you were paired with one particular coach, you got an opportunity to see all of these other coaches working in different sports. And you got an opportunity to see how they programmed, how they coached, what they looked for. Um, and so, what it one enabled me to do was, to your first question, it gave me an opportunity to work with coaches that looked at human movement within the context of their particular sport in a way that I never had gotten to before, right? Where you had a coach that was like, I'm coaching a baseball player, so this is how I'm looking at rotation, or I'm coaching a golfer, this is how I'm looking at rotation. Or, I'm coaching a football player, this is how we're looking at, how they accelerate from 0 to 10, and how we program for these very specific scenarios. So as far as getting an opportunity to learn from those coaches and expand my network, it was an incredibly influential experience. um, the biggest thing that I got from my time there, though, was organizing all of these things, right? I think a lot of times what happens with coaches is they understand that there's so many things that they want to include in a program, or so many things that they want to develop, but the organization of those components and actually having a system is where maybe not so much nowadays, but especially then, and especially for me, like that is not what I had. I didn't have a way of organizing these things so that they spoke to each other in a really powerful way, and so that I could understand maybe where the limitations were showing themselves. So my experience there was incredibly powerful because it enabled me to start making sense of what was going on, or at least giving me a place to look for the answers in the event that things were not turning out the way that I wanted them to as a coach. So yeah, I mean, I can't speak enough about my time there and the coaches there.
Nice, nice. Because I think I had the same feeling about like the Exos methodology. Like
Mm-hmm.
before I learned about like how Exos program their training, I was like, man, like I want to put movement in it. I want to put speed in it.
Yep.
I also want to do power. Like how did that all that fit? But like
Right.
after like learning the methodology or like the system, it kind of just like stick with me. And what's interesting, like really interesting and really helpful is like it's I think it's 5 years ago when I went to like Exos, Arizona, and
Mm-hmm.
then now I'm currently working at like University of Louisville. So I
Nice.
work with some like coaches like graduate from big time school and big time name, and I get to teach them how to like I get to teach them
Yeah.
how to program. And when they get a new, what's funny is like when they get a new job, they call me Eric. Can you help me with the programming? I'm like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that was
That
awesome.
That's awesome, dude. And like that's the whole thing, right? Like, and maybe it's not the whole thing, but it's such a huge part of it because, as we used to say, we always want to set up ourselves and our athletes for success. And there's no better way to do that than like having a system of putting all of these components together. So I
Yeah.
love it, man. I love hearing that that was your experience because, like, to me, that's the whole thing, man. Like that's it.
Nice. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. So, um, enough for like the Exos methodology. Uh, your time at Exos, spent like 7 years as a lead combine like strength and conditioning coach, right? Does that
Yeah.
mean like you kind of like program all the strength and conditioning for the combine group?
Yeah, so I did a lot of the programming and the facilitating of the program was led by me. There, of course, we worked as a team, so I'm not going to say like I wrote the programs and everybody else did them. You know, we have a number of different facilities, so we definitely would meet, but a large degree of it, yes, was written by me and also facilitated by me.
So this is gonna be, I think it's gonna be a two-part question or a three-part question, but the first part is like it's been so many years that Exos had like great success with like combine prep or like
Mm-hmm,
NFL combine. So,
mm-hmm.
uh, how did you like, this is kind of a big one, but like how exactly did you, um, like it's 8 week or 12 week, how exactly did you help these athletes get better in like only 8 week of time or like 12 week of time?
Yeah, so um, great question. The first thing that I would say is the power of the programming is not just like what's being done in the weight room. It's a huge part, but there are so many surrounding elements that have to be included and operate at a high level for them to be able to do what they do. I think one of the things, and it might be unfairly stated, but I still feel like it's important to state, is that people may think that the success that Exos has experienced and that we experienced was in large part due to, what I either wrote on a program or what Nick had on a speed program, and that was it. We know that's not really all that it is, right? They need incredible nutrition. They need incredible physical therapy and or athletic training, and or if not like in need of dealing with specific injuries, just people that are supremely dedicated to tissue health. They need to be in environments where they feel safe, there's psychological safety, so that when they show up they give their best. The program at Exos was what we would consider to be like a full scope program where all of those things were operating at the highest level, and all of those things are necessary for them to experience the success that they experienced. And while we were rigorous in trying to figure out what was the exact loading strategy from day to day, week to week, how it was linking up with what they were doing in their sprint work and their movement work, how that was linking up with what they were doing with their sports specific work. The ability for them to come in on day one and leave on the last day of 12 weeks was everything that the exosystem preaches: movement, mindset, nutrition, recovery, right? Like any one of those pieces that are missing, that performance doesn't show up on the final day, right? So it's not me trying to skirt around your question, Eric. It is me saying like that is how they got through it, because what I will say is the volume, the intensity they are exposed to for 12 weeks in order to see the results that they saw is beyond understanding. Like we trained them because we only had 12 weeks. Like it sounds like a lot, it's not a lot of time. And so there was an incredibly high amount of volume and training that was done. And therefore, in order for any of that volume to actually be realized, all of those other components needed to be there. So it's the system is my answer. The system is what does it.
Cool, cool. So, um, like you mentioned, after like your time at Exos, you work with Cleveland Brown and Munster Rugby. So,
Yep.
what exactly like this is also a big question. So, what's the difference between training a combine group or like programming for the whole season for like a football player or like rugby player?
Yeah. The key difference, well, there are a number of very, very specific differences. One, um, while we know start and end dates for both scenarios, we know the start of a season, the end of a season. We kind of do. We don't really do for the sports teams, right? We have an idea of what it could look like, but we're not entirely sure. Whereas with the combine, we knew January 2nd to, if it's this year, March 5th, right? Like we've got, all right, we know we've got that amount of time. And so the programming can become very, very contained. It's also essentially like closed skill or closed loop programming, right? Like we're not worried about how they're going to react on the field, how they have to respond to things, right? Like it's essentially these are closed skill tests that they're doing that we just have to really make their performance in like the content of it kind of a way that we're looking at it really, really robust, right? So combine training, while it's not easy from the standpoint of all of the other things that I mentioned, it is simple. It's simple in the sense of we know the start date, we know the end date, we know the tests, we know what looks good, we know what doesn't look so good, we know that they're fairly controlled, we know where they're going to be, we know what surface they're going to be on, we know what the environment's going to be like. Like there's so many knowns that we have that programming for it is simple. Completely different when we're talking about um, uh, sports and professional sports, right? Because now you're not the test isn't just get this person faster. That doesn't always translate, right? It may not translate to what the head coach's vision of how he wants to play is, right? So like all of a sudden, if the head coach has a philosophy, then how you are preparing your players is to meet that philosophy. You have to think about the environment. You have to think about, travel schedules and recovery. It's a lot more, I don't like to use the word reactive, but it is. It's a lot more reactive. It's a lot more fluid. And so programming for professional sports teams reflects kind of that fluidity in terms of making sure that you're improving the players. They have to be physically robust, especially in sports like football and rugby. But it's not as easy as, oh, we've got exactly 67 days to prepare for this. And so we can do that. Um, I know it's kind of a vague answer, but the truth of it is you have to be far more fluid and responsive and agile in your program design when you're working with team sports versus the agility in combine preparation is how you communicate with the athlete, but there isn't a whole lot of deviating from the program, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I once talked to Andrew Paul. Shout out to Andrew Paul, one of my great
Yeah,
friends. Yeah, he said
I
to
know,
me,
I know. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, he said to me that combine prep is more about getting them fat, bigger, stronger, faster. But like the whole season, like programming for the whole season, or like handling whole season of training, it's more like handling stiffness, handling like fatigue. So if you so
Yes.
I can't I can't put the same mindset of like just make them bigger, stronger, faster into like the player they're gonna play the whole season.
Right. Right. And strength and conditioning is a tool for confidence. It's a tool for belief. It's a psychological augmenter as much as it is a physical one, right? And so while both in both scenarios, somebody getting bigger, faster, stronger in preparation for combine is important. And to your point, someone not feeling crushed by the season or by a game also has the same psychological lift as well. So yeah, shout out to Andrew Paul for that because he's absolutely right. Being able to utilize your expertise for that end. How do I get this person to believe that they are in the best possible position to perform at the highest level possible is really what we're doing. And it's just done in different ways. Yeah.
Cool, cool. So um I got another question. It's about like it's also kind of related to like load management. So it's about like uh there's like GPS now. So can you like give us your thoughts on like the GPS and what are like some metrics you're gonna track? And the last thing is like so there's like different position for football and different position for like rugby.
Mm-hmm.
Um do you track different metrics for different position?
Yeah. So, big question. So, GPS for me, GPS is like any other tool that you're going to use. So, it's like your barbell. It's like a kettlebell. It's like anything. It seems different because it's on the data side, but essentially all it's doing is it's hopefully enabling you to be able to make decisions that are the proper decisions for your training. Um, Not all data. I once heard the statement, we don't have a data problem, we have a knowledge transfer problem. Problem is probably not the best word to use, right? But can GPS it functions really well if the data feeds into your program, feeds into your system, feeds into your philosophy the way that you need it to. If not, it's just more information, which is not necessarily knowledge, right? So first things first, I'm a believer in GPS insofar as you're able to utilize metrics, to your point, that help feed your program design and help with your decision making. Next question. Yes, there are certain metrics that we looked at or at least paid either greater attention to or gave greater weight to, depending upon the position that a person played. So we may have had 5 metrics that we looked at, right? We may have looked at XLs, decels, um, uh, top speed, top speed over a certain distance, and collisions, right? Let's say that we looked at those 5. Collisions may have been way more important for us to either look at, track, or look to improve for, say, like props, linemen, linebackers, mid row, right? Maybe not so big for wide receivers, maybe not so big for wingers. Whereas top speed over a certain distance may have been more important for um, our wingers in rugby and like wide receivers in football, right? It doesn't mean we weren't looking at those metrics for the entire team, but we gave a greater weight depending upon the position, understanding that it was either going to be an issue from a performance standpoint or an injury prevention standpoint. So, one thing that we didn't want to do, as I mentioned earlier, was have 15 different metrics that we were looking at because we were thinking that we've got all of these different positions. And like, no, really, like the game has the same lines, it has the same rules. Certain people do certain things a bit more than others within that space, but for the most part, we can reduce it to a certain few key metrics that we can look at and then just pull the levers on those depending upon which player did more of that or less. So GPS did play a huge role for us, especially at Munster. I think GPS is, at least for me in my experience at the time, it's probably come much further now in football. But at the time when I was in Cleveland, we were really just starting to look at it with football players. Whereas when I was at Munster, it was very much a key and central element of tracking decision making on a day-to-day basis and really building a lot of our load management or performance enhancement, right, approach to what we did.
So, like you mentioned, for those metrics or like for those like data, um, besides like GPS, I know force weight is another piece of technology that get utilized a lot, and like I know like EXO started to like put that into like the combine in the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so for those like all those technology, like you mentioned, it's another tool to help you understand the context, understand the sport, understand the need of the game. How like I'll ask it in a different way. So uh
Yeah.
there's more and more technology, like coaches rely on technology more than before. Um, do you certainly think that's a bad thing or like it's a good thing? Or like in what sense like maybe we should like use technology more?
Yeah. Right. So this is what I believe. As mentioned earlier, and it's interesting that you brought up force plays because I put it in the same category, right? It's a way for us to get more data, accelerometers, um, anything that's going to give us like raw data. I think is only as beneficial as you're able to utilize the data in front of you, right? The issue is the data is not giving you the answer. You have to find the answer within the data. I think if you believe that the technology is going to give you the answer that you want or that you're looking for, I believe that's a misstep because I don't think that's what those tools do. They spit back to you what they capture, and that's it. You then have to be able to determine, discern, figure out how does this fit into my system? Do I need it? Is it applicable? So on and so forth. So, as an example, and I may be way off. So, if anybody listening to this says this dude doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about, I'm with you on it. Cool. Force plates. I was talking to a friend and a colleague of mine recently that works in basketball, and he told me that they do squat jumps on the force plate, right? And it's fairly common to do that on a force plate, right? Like there's a lot of information you're going to get. I then, in casual conversation, just like this with you, Eric, I'd asked him how they're doing the squat jump. And he said it's a squat jump, right? So I said it's interesting because in basketball, basketball players use a lot more fast stretch shortening cycle movements than slow stretch shortening cycle movements, right? So if you're performing a slow stretch shortening cycle movement on the force plate, are you getting the data that you really need to apply to the players? And then that becomes a question of are you using the data for injury prevention or performance enhancement? And if it's for performance enhancement, does your slow stretch shortening cycle movement on the force plate give you the data you need to make the correct decisions for performance enhancement if that's not the way they're executing the jump on the court? And he looked at me and I said, and this is kind of what I'm like, that's the kind of question that I have. And that's what I mean, because the force plate isn't going to tell you that. The force plate's only going to spit back what you did. My question to you as the coach is, are you using that data for performance enhancement? And therefore, should it be a bit more contextual the way you're assessing this for this reason? Or if it's just for injury prevention, I get it. But why are you using it? And assuming that you have the data is not the way to go, because the longer the movement, the more joint angles you involve, the greater opportunity there is for asymmetry. So if you are getting asymmetrical data because you have them do a squat jump on the plate, but you're really just concerned with how they rebound, then you may not be getting the information you were looking for. You know what I mean? Like that's the example that I try to use. So I think it's really, really powerful if you know what you want and if you know what you're looking for. If you're expecting it to give you an answer without you having the context, then I think it becomes very not dangerous, but it probably is not giving you what you need. So that's my answer to that. I think you have to know what you want first. And then, yeah, everything becomes an incredible tool, right?
Yeah. This is I think this is why I like Exos, and I like coaches that work at Exos or work with Exos before, because they focus on movement so much that they understand like how the body move. And so when it comes like technology, you know what you're gonna looking at. Instead of like nowadays coaches are like, oh, we have like force plate, so we just look at force plate. But when the number can't connect with uh how they move on the court, they don't know how to deal with that.
Right. Right. You know what I mean? And it's really it's important, and saying speaking to you earlier about it, I don't know that they don't do it at other places, but at Exos, understanding the system, understanding movement, not necessarily developing your own philosophy, but at least channeling your decision making through this lens first, as opposed to the other way around, was something that was really important. Something that we learned from the coaches there. It's a cultural piece that is really, really powerful. So I know everybody wants to be very, very good right now, and technology kind of dangles the prospect of you being able to do that. Listen, I am not a sports scientist by any means, but I kind of know what I would want to see. So I'm not going to say I don't need to be one, but I know just enough to be dangerous to ask the right questions, I feel like. And I think that's where people need to start by like asking the right questions, you know.
Yeah, nice, nice. So, uh, that's enough for technology. The last part of the podcast, I want to talk about like movement
Yeah.
because
Yep.
I I personally enjoy watching how athletes move, and I think that starts from like f 4 years ago or 5 years ago when I was at Exos Arizona, and I
Yeah.
personally think that kind of helped me grow a lot. So, I want to start by like when I was at Exos Arizona, like multi-directional movement or change of direction, they categorize in like shuffle or crossover.
Mhm.
Does that change? And like when you teach change of direction or like multi-directional movement, like what are some key things you're gonna look at?
Yeah. So I think to answer the first question, does it change? I would say no, it doesn't, right? A lot of what we did is based on, I hate when you say it, is based on physics, right? Position, being able to put yourself in the right position, and knowing that um, position comes first was like it's the key thing, right? So one, can you achieve that position, and if you cannot, why can't you achieve those positions, right? So like we work from the ground up. I'm looking at ankle, knee, hip. Can they achieve just basic flexion, basic extension in those movements, right? First things first. Can they do it in a way where they're able to place their center of mass where it needs to be? So can they control their center of mass? And then the next thing is, can they not positionally through action, so not just like anatomical position, but then now through physical position, global position, can they put themselves in the right way to to move as well as they can, right? So when I'm looking at somebody move multi-directionally, can they get up and down? If they cannot, where are they? Where's the limitation? Can they position their center of mass where it needs to be? And then can they position their body in space where it needs to be to capitalize on the first two things, center of mass and essentially, you know, their physical ability to achieve positions. So, and then can they do that on both sides? Right, because when we talk about multi-direction, it's both sides, right? So can they do those things? So those are the things that I look for first. More like technical applications are things that are easy for us to teach. Like you said, crossover versus shuffling, right? Inside edge of the foot versus outside edge of the foot. How, like, that stuff that we can teach. Um, I'm more concerned with how they instinctively manage their body in space, and can their body create the shapes and get into the positions needed to actually execute what we need them to do. So that's what I'm looking for. Can they get into position not only this way, but then rotate and use the earth, you know, to move from? Does that make
Cool.
sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, for all those years of like coaching football player, rugby player, um, do you think that I like so what like coaches kind of categorize there's like a fascia based athlete or like there's muscle based athlete. Do you think that there's like we can categorize athlete like fascia based and muscle based and how exactly did they move differently?
Yeah. Um, I think you can create categories that make sense to you for any athlete in the way that they are able to express the way that they move. Those two categories are categories I've never personally heard of or used, but I can kind of immediately see where you would categorize them. I would think if you're talking about like a more elastic athlete is probably a word that I would have used in the past, whereas a fascia based athlete, I feel like that's probably the same link, right? Where we're looking at athletes that are definitely either more receptive or have developed a more elastic ability and can utilize it versus those that don't. Do I think that those categories exist? I do. Do I think that training towards the strength or the predisposition of an athlete is important, I do as well. I like the idea of it. The greater question then becomes, though, what is the demand of the environment that the athlete is going to be in, and then what is the cost slash benefit of either taking the time to develop what they're missing versus just improving what they're already good at, with the idea that the difference is not what is inhibiting them from performing at the highest levels, right? So I'm going to try and encapsulate my answer. Yes, I do think you can categorize those two. Yes, I do think that those two are very distinct and that there are athletes that fit into either bucket on a higher or lower level. I think the nature to which you feel like you have to fill in a weakness versus elevating strength is largely dependent upon the environment that they're in. So it may not be necessary. So this is kind of what I'm going to say. There was a point in time, and it's even in the XPS, where explosive strength deficit was something that I felt like we should look at, right? I felt like, hey, I think it's important to know from a neuromuscular efficiency standpoint that if when you start to involve the stretch shortening cycle, if somebody's not able to demonstrate a certain improvement in percentage, then it's probably something that you need to look for. And I had a conversation with a track and field coach that said, I think that's a great idea, but for my sprinters, they don't need it. Why? Because for the most part, sprinters moving out of blocks, like, it doesn't carry the same weight. So I'm not as concerned if I see that the explosive strength deficit is closer than, say, an athlete in a different sport, right? And so it provides, when you provide that kind of context, it kind of, oh yeah, absolutely, right? So it's not just always make things balanced. It's not just always fill in the gaps, right? The content of it, I think, is valuable, but it always will come back to context and how you apply it.
Nice, nice, nice. So, uh, besides like multi-directional movement, besides like elastic part or like muscle based athlete, um, the other like big topic nowadays is like deceleration.
Deceleration, yeah, that's what I
And
was
I
going to
know
guess.
like Exos, I know like Exos coaches at Exos are good at teaching deceleration. So also can you like share with us what are some key things you're gonna look at when you teach deceleration?
Yeah, the big thing for me with decel is going to be angles. Again, deceleration and acceleration exist on the same plane. They are literally just directionally different, right? So a lot of the very same concepts that we would look for in acceleration, honestly, we're looking for in deceleration. They just have to have a greater magnitude, ironically, to decelerate than accelerate, right? To slow themselves down. But a lot of the concepts are the same. Um, body height, position. A lot of these things for me are universal, Eric, right? Like, can they control their center of mass? Can they get themselves into shapes and positions where they're able to slow themselves down? And more importantly, what is the next movement after that, right? Because deceleration really just sets up re-acceleration. So can they get into those positions? Very rarely in a number of the sports that I've worked with where you need deceleration, is it just like deceleration for the sake of coming to a pure and complete stop. You know what I mean? So a lot of it is, can you do those first things and then set yourself up for whatever the next movement is?
Nice, nice, nice. So, I think that's all the question I have for you today. So, I'm really looking forward to like I think it's July 4th. You're gonna do Exos XPS at Taiwan. So,
Yeah.
before we did that, like, do you have any like any words you want to say with those coaches who are coming to the Exos XPS course?
I'm extremely excited. I am. I love the opportunity to work with, meet, talk to, share with coaches. I love the opportunity to talk about things that we just talked about. Like this was the highlight of my day, man. I love this. I can't wait to get there and do this, not just like talk, but like share, interact, hopefully elevate, improve, each other. I expect to learn a lot as well. I can't wait. I can't wait.
Nice, nice. Because uh after all these years of pro basketball player, coaching national teams like athletes, I feel like EXOS helped me a lot. Like I mentioned, even at Louisville, I work with like coaches that study under big time school, big time name. I'm able to teach them because I learned the Exos methodology, and these came from like Nick Wickerman, like Tristan, Victor Hall, Mark, and you, Dennis Logan. So like these legends. So I'm really honored and excited to work with you.
Same here. I can't wait to actually meet you in person and have more time to chat, dude. Like this was awesome, and I'm looking forward to it.
So, for those who are interested in what we're talking about today, where can they reach out to you?
Yeah. Uh, automatedstrengthcoach.com. Dennis at automatedstrengthcoach.com. If I need to put it in either a chat or something, please send me an email. Reach out to me there. I answer all of my emails. I'm more than happy to chat. So, yeah.